22,000. Thank you so much. And if you think the president has credibility issues when it comes to these contradictory claims about the stock market, welcome to our politics lead now. In a brand new Quinnipiac poll just released, the president's approval rating isn't just underwater, it's drowning. 61% of those polled disapprove of the job President Trump is doing. Among a key part of the president's base, white voters with no college degree, 43% say he's doing a good job, while 50% disapprove. 50% of white non-college educated voters disapprove. One key reason for these horrific numbers for the poll for the president, 62% of the American people say President Trump is not honest. In addition, 71% of voters say President Trump is not level-headed, compared to 26% who say he is. 60% of voters say they believe President Trump thinks that he is above the law. 57% of the American people polled say he is abusing the powers of his office. And then there's this. A majority of the American people, 54%, say that they are embarrassed to have Donald Trump as their president. 26% are proud. CNN's Sarah Murray is live for us at the White House right now. And Sarah, some of these issues may be starting to hurt the president, even with his base. Today he is throwing out some red meat in terms of conservative policy proposals.
That's right, Jake, and it's actually been the last few days that we are seeing this administration and this president in particular go out of his way to try and ensure this base of supporters, the people who put him in this White House, stay on board. Today it was the administration unveiling a new immigration plan that would dramatically rewrite the rules of legal immigration in this country.
With his domestic agenda stalled and his approval numbers mired in historic lows, President Trump is pitching to his base.
It's great to be here today to unveil legislation that would represent the most significant reform to our immigration system in a half a century.
Trump, alongside Republican Senators Tom Cotton and David Perdue, unveiling a plan today designed to cut legal immigration to the U.S. by 50%.
You're all set?
It aims to remake America's legal immigration system so it's less rooted in family migration, instead creating a so-called merit-based system that grades potential immigrants on their readiness to work in the U.S.
Our workers.
Trump touting the proposal Wednesday as a way to protect American workers by reducing lower-skilled immigration.
Among those hit the hardest in recent years have been immigrants and, very importantly, minority workers competing for jobs against brand new arrivals. And it has not been fair to our people, to our citizens, to our workers.
Cracking down on immigration, both legal and illegal, was a cornerstone of Trump's presidential bid.
Every time an African-American citizen or a Hispanic citizen or any citizen loses their job to an illegal immigrant, the rights of that American citizen have been totally violated. They're losing their jobs.
But the legislation is already facing skepticism from some Republicans as well as Democrats.
We think it's a non-starter.
But it marks just one of the ways Trump is working to shore up the base of supporters who helped get him elected. The Department of Justice is also preparing to steer more resources from its Civil Rights Division toward investigating universities for affirmative action policies deemed discriminatory toward white applicants. That's according to the New York Times, which obtained an internal Justice Department document about the plan.
While the White House does not confirm or deny the existence of potential investigations, the Department of Justice will always review credible allegation of discrimination on the basis of any race.
All of this coming on the heels of Trump's impromptu Twitter announcement that transgender individuals would be barred from serving in the military.
Rise up, resist!
A Twitter proclamation that has not yet led to a change in policy, as the Joint Chiefs await further guidance from the White House. Meanwhile, the administration is preparing to take a tougher line on China's trade policies, a key campaign trail issue for then-candidate Trump.
We can't continue to allow China to rape our country, and that's what they're doing. It's the greatest theft in the history of the world.
Now, a number of these plays to shore up the base would actually require the administration to stay focused, for instance, on a single legislative issue. For instance, on immigration, that's going to be tough to do when Congress is also trying to do tax reform. And at the president's request, he wants them to go back to health care. All of this before we get to whatever the president may decide to wake up and tweet tomorrow morning. Jake.
All right, Sarah Murray at the White House for us. Thank you so much. As President Trump tries to please his base one by one, more Republican senators are feeling emboldened to push back against the president's message here and there. Is this causing a trend? And is it causing deep divides within the party? We'll get a read on all this with one Republican senator here to join me next. Stay with us.
The Lead with Jake Tapper, brought to you by the...
Especially with our own Jim Acosta there and Stephen Miller, deputy there at the White House, and then, of course, followed by a number of topics with Sarah Huckabee Sanders. A lot of questions on this Russia sanctions bill, also imposing sanctions on North Korea and Iran. But before we get to that, I think we really should start with this immigration policy, this proposal from the White House today that essentially would make the immigration policy, they're hoping to reduce legal immigration by 50%, proposing this merit-based or skill-based workers program. So let me begin with Margaret Talev, who is a White House correspondent. And beginning with you, this is all about, and also the fact that it was Stephen Miller delivering the message, you know, playing to the base 100%. But on the face of it, yes, his base supporters would love this, and this is a campaign promise, but would this actually get the support necessary from Republicans in Congress?
Yeah, Brooke, this is, as you know, all immigration proposals are controversial proposals in the U.S. Congress, and this is definitely no exception. You're right to note the timing. We're heading into the August recess. Everyone from members of Congress to President Trump has got to reach their constituencies and show them they're doing stuff they care about. That's what this does for now. But look, they start on health care reform. The tax legislation has to take front and center when they come back after the recess. And there is one senator who, once again, will be crucial to all of this. It is one Senator John McCain. As you know, he played a pivotal role in the health care debate, at first for good for President Trump and then not so much for good. And John McCain, as we know, all undergoing cancer treatment right now, and a champion of immigration reform that moves in the opposite direction. So I think this would certainly be an uphill climb, but President Trump is putting it out there.
Stay with me, everyone. We now have a microphone on Jim Acosta. Jim Acosta, my CNN colleague and also a Cuban American. I know your backstory, but
Sure.
Perhaps Stephen Miller was not aware when he was the whole back and forth with the green card. Jim Acosta, your questions were about, you know, being surprised that you would have to speak English to come here. What the heck did you make of that exchange?
Well, you can be Cuban and cosmopolitan, Brooke. I don't know what to tell you. You know, I think when the White House has to resort to insulting reporters in that fashion, and we've seen this time and again throughout the course of this administration, they're just really not advancing a terribly powerful argument. When somebody who is steeped in, you know, immigration policy knowledge, like Stephen Miller is, he worked for Jeff Sessions for many years. They're very much on the anti-illegal immigration footing, you know, in terms of what their policy beliefs are. And some critics say they are very much anti-legal immigration. And what you're seeing from this policy proposal today here at the White House, when they put in the policy proposal, Brooke, that there's this preference for people who speak English coming into the country, you know, my question simply was, well, you know, what about what our Statue of Liberty tells us? Our Statue of Liberty tells us that we've welcomed generations of Americans over the course of our history. Many of those people, whether they came from Ireland or Germany or other parts of the world, Latin America, you know, in recent times, those people don't always speak English. And so why is it that the White House is advancing a policy proposal that has this sort of English language speaking preference? You heard Stephen Miller say, well, when you're naturalized, you have to speak English. Well, yes, when you're naturalized, you're at the very end of the immigration process. And so I was simply just trying to press him on some of those questions as to whether this sort of goes against this tradition of immigration in this country, that we bring in all types of people, not necessarily people who are highly skilled, who are computer programmers, who speak fluent English. There are people we bring into this country from all walks of life, from all income levels, from all language speaking abilities, because we're the United States of America. You know, you mentioned my father. My father came here 3 weeks before the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. He's 11 years old, didn't speak any English. He tells me the story about how, you know, a teacher at his school in Vienna, Virginia, sat down with him and patiently taught him English as he was growing up here in Northern Virginia. You know, I think this goes back to a problem that this White House has. Remember, when the president launched his campaign for president, he referred to Mexican immigrants as rapists and criminals. And that bias against Latino immigrants has just sort of infected the president, some of his top officials who deal with this issue of immigration throughout that entire time period. And I think you saw some of that spill out in the briefing room today.
Let me just remind everyone, we cited this as well from the Statue of Liberty. This was precisely your original point. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Jim, you know, you brought up illegal immigration, but this whole proposal is about, you know, the goal cutting legal immigration by 50%.
Sure.
Do you think it goes anywhere, or does it just fire up the base?
Well, you heard Stephen Miller say in his comments here, well, this is very popular in certain battleground states and so on. And so they do feel, and keep in mind when you go back, I covered this campaign. Brooke, you covered it as well. We were out there on the campaign trail in places like Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, that blue wall that President Trump is very proud of the fact that he cracked on election night. There are people in those states who feel as though they've been displaced unfairly economically in this country. And of course, it is going to be a very powerful message if you have the President of the United States constantly blaming immigrants coming into this country for taking people's jobs away. And does the president come out and say that emphatically, and does he say it overtly? No. But when you hear the president make some of the comments that he makes about immigrants during the course of the campaign, talking about deportation forces, and when you see Stephen Miller, a policy advisor to the president, talking about an English language preference for people coming into this country, it is a wink, it is a dog whistle to certain parts of this country that they are going to be looking at the racial and ethnic flow of immigrants coming into this country. I just think that's undeniable. And so I just wanted to remind him, this is what the Statue of Liberty says. This is what our tradition has always been in this country. We bring in people from all walks of life. It's what makes America great. It was already great because of immigrants in this country.
Jim Acosta, thank you so much. Caitlin
Sure.
Huey Burns is here with me on her birthday. And just so following up on that point, and we were talking as we were listening to Jim and then to Sarah Huckabee Sanders, thinking of the why. Let me step back a step and say that they are making good on a promise on immigration. This is something that candidate Trump championed day in and day out on the trail. And so for your Trump supporters out there, this is great news. Why is this happening now, though? In addition to that, today, also this affirmative action story out of the New York Times. Granted, Sarah Huckabee Sanders says it's based on, it's incorrect.
Right.
Why now?
A few different things. First of all, you look at what happened last week with the failed health care bill in the Senate. That was a major campaign promise as well, undelivered. You have this tension between Donald Trump and Jeff Sessions, who Stephen Miller used to work for, a very hardliner on immigration. Trump's connection to the really conservative policy aspect of the base. That tension has created some issues. Going back to kind of these principles of the base, principles of the campaign, is a way for Donald Trump to show, look, I'm going without Congress. I don't care what they're doing. This is my priority. The thing is, with this kind of piece, you need support from Congress. This is a piece of legislation. And as Margaret alluded to earlier, support among Republicans, this is an issue that kind of divides the party in some respects on immigration. And there could be a way in a broader package, perhaps, to try to kind of needle Democrats from the Wisconsins, the Michigans, elsewhere who are up for re-election in 2018 with this worker issue. The interesting thing, though, as we've been watching Democrats, they haven't crossed the line. They haven't been fearful of this president on policy. They haven't had any political incentive to work with him on other things. So I don't see them doing that now.
Let me add, as we're thinking about the base and the core support among Republicans versus maybe more moderate Republicans, we saw this tweet, and I'm going to come to you on this, that Senator Lindsey Graham put out there saying in South Carolina, his home state, the #1 industry is agricultural tourism. Let me make sure I'm reading this right. South Carolina, #1 industry is agricultural tourism. #2, if proposal were to become law, devastating to South Carolina economy, which relies on this immigrant workforce. Aaron Guerin, thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I think clearly there's a tension here that this White House proposal for legislation doesn't address, which is, what is the reason for low-skilled immigration, both legal and illegal? I mean, and it is largely to fill jobs that go unfilled or less than fully filled otherwise. It's interesting that Stephen Miller was premising the whole idea of this legislative proposal on the idea that it would serve underemployed and low education, low wage American workers. As there was a question in the briefing on this, and there's a fundamental question as to whether that is factually true. There are studies that absolutely do not support that, in addition to the few that he appeared to cite that do. And I mean, I think what Graham is referring to there largely is the whole idea that you've got to have a large mobile workforce that isn't going to be paid a great deal in order to serve both the agriculture and the tourism industries. Sure. And he's saying, look, we somehow or other we have to have people to do these jobs.
So he needs a congressional support there. Where he unquestionably got congressional support was in this Russian sanctions bill, which he finally signed into law today. We heard the president calling it earlier, called it flawed. You know, this was something that was veto-proof, and it seems to me, Admiral John Kirby, that, you know, this was something that perhaps we talk about the different branches of government, and you have to listen to the legislative branch because they obviously have a say, and this encroaches upon the powers of the president. And what do you make of that, and why this seemingly took so long?
Well, you talked about support from Congress on this. I think he obviously would consider it unwelcome support. This is not a bill that I think he was all that interested in signing for a myriad of reasons, not the least of which you talked about is the impingement on some of his executive authority. I want to believe, Brooke, that the reason it took several days to sign this was because he had his lawyers poring over these authorities and what it meant, so that he could make a legal case for why the bill is flawed in that regard. I sure as heck don't want to think that he was delaying signing it because he was concerned about slapping these sanctions on Putin. I have said for many days that, I'm disappointed that he won't criticize Putin directly in Russia while everybody else does. But if he signed this bill, to me, that was proof enough in my mind that he actually was willing to hold Russia accountable. So I'm glad he signed it. I understand the concern over his executive authority, and I hope that that's really the limit of his concerns over this, and then we can move past all this and continue to hold Putin accountable.
Tim O'Brien, what do you think? You've written the book on the man.
Well, Brooke, I think the Russia question is an interesting one because that is the background music to everything that's happening now. This investigation's hung over the administration, and I think that the timing of the immigration bill comes on the heels of transgenders in the military last week, and I think these efforts by this White House to shore up their base, to divert people's attention from what the real issues are. And I think to really roll the dice, John McCain is rearing his head again in this administration. They're going to need him to get this immigration bill through. They are probably not going to get him. He's a senator from Arizona. Like Lindsey Graham, you've got migrant workers coming in and out of that state that the state economy relies upon. I think it's a very strange choice for this White House to put Stephen Miller out in front again. He's a controversial person.
He's of the Bannon branch.
He's the Bannon branch. Remember, some of the first missteps this administration took was the executive order on banning migration from mostly Muslim countries. And Stephen Miller was the flag bearer for that, I think, very flawed executive order. And now they're bringing him out again at a time when the administration has had enormous upheaval in the West Wing. They've been unable to get Obamacare repealed. They should be focusing on tax reform, which is another one of the things that's important to their base. And they throw this sort of bomb into the middle of the dialogue, and it's not tied to legislation they're actually going to be able to get through the Congress. So why? And I think the answer to the why is they're playing politics. And
no, Caitlin hit on that.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah, and I think it explains a lot.
And to your point, it's August 2nd right now. This is you talk about tax reform. I've covered the immigration bill in Congress several years ago. There is very little appetite among members of Congress to take up the divisive issue of immigration at this point in time, when they want to figure out things on healthcare, on fixing the markets, and on tax reform.
And they just told them let's move off of Obamacare. Obamacare.
Exactly.
Let's move towards tax reform, and then bam, they drop immigration.
What about this
starting to see
affirmative
that
action
friction.
story? Let me just move on. I've got 5 more minutes before we turn this thing over to Washington. And I want to make sure we have this conversation because listening to the White House press secretary just then, she was pressing back on this New York Times report that the Trump administration may be getting ready to take on affirmative action in colleges. So here's the exchange, and then we'll talk.
Does the president believe that white applicants to college are the victim of discrimination?
I'm not aware of that opinion at all. I certainly haven't had that conversation or have any reason to.
But can you explain why the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division is devoting its limited time and resources to
Quite an accusatory question, but I'd be happy to respond. The New York Times article is based entirely on uncorroborated inferences from a leaked internal personnel posting in violation of Department of Justice policy. And while the White House does not confirm or deny the existence of potential investigations, the Department of Justice will always review credible allegation of discrimination on the basis of any race.
Let me bring in a few voices on this. CNN legal analyst Joey Jackson, Brenda Shum, director of the Educational Opportunities Project for the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, and Linda Chavez, chairwoman of the Center for Equal Opportunity. She has led this conservative movement to opposition to affirmative action for more than 30 years. So welcome to all of you. I've got 4 minutes, and I know we need way more on this super important topic. But Linda, just you welcome this approach from what I understand. Just tell me why, and do you think that there is an anti-white bias in college admissions?
Well, the question of racial preferences is not about anti-white bias. In fact, my organization has done studies of this for the last 20 years, and what we find is the group most discriminated against on the basis of racial preferences are not whites, but Asian Americans, and occasionally Hispanics have some disadvantage as well. What is unfortunate is that this administration likes to throw dog whistles, does try to racialize everything, and so obviously it's going to raise the hackles of some people. My concern about current racial preference programs is that they serve as a disadvantage to those students whom they're intended to help. They result in mismatching of students. Students are admitted with lower grades and test scores and put in situations where they are less likely to graduate, where their GPAs are lower. And we've shown this, as I say, for 20 years. We've done more than 24 studies of racial admissions policies. And my concern is more about the Black and Hispanic students who will incur greater debt and be less likely to graduate as a result of these policies, and Asian students who also are kept out because of them.
Brenda, how do you see it?
This move by the Department of Justice to assemble a team that intends to investigate and challenge race-based admissions simply perpetuates this myth that such policies are constitute impermissible race-based discrimination, and that's simply not true. I believe that, to the contrary, the Supreme Court, just as recently as June of last year, clearly decided that such admissions policies are constitutional. And this action represents the next step in what we believe to be an aggressive and strategic campaign to roll back the civil rights protections of a number of historically disadvantaged students, including trans youth, women and girls, and of course students of color. I think that it's inappropriate for this Department of Justice to imply that the Civil Rights Division has not historically adequately investigated legitimate complaints of race-based discrimination. And there are many within the Asian American community which are wholly supportive of affirmative action policies and recognize that this is a politicized attempt to drive a wedge within the community of students of color.
I have 40 seconds left on the show. Do we have time for Joey, guys? Why are we handing it over early? We're handing it over early? Okay, apparently we're handing it over early. Joey Jackson, my profoundest apologies to you. I'm Brooke Baldwin. Let's go to the lead. Starts now. To President Trump and some phone calls, specifically his claims about 2 phone conversations filled with Trump praise, one from Mexico's President Enrique Peña Nieto, the other from head of the Boy Scouts. Both parties involved now say these phone calls never happened, but President Trump did talk to the Wall Street Journal last week after his speech to the Boy Scouts, and this is just part of the transcript that we have that was released by Politico. Quote, I got a call from the head of the Boy Scouts saying it was the greatest speech that was ever made to them, and they were very thankful. But the thing here is that the Boy Scouts are unaware of any phone call between President Trump and Scout leadership, and the Scout statement apologizing for President Trump's political speech still stands. So, Caitlin Collins is working this for us from outside the White House. Caitlin, so that's the Boy Scouts. Talk to me about this alleged phone call between the President of Mexico and the President of the United States. Did it or did it not happen?
That's a great question. It's being called into question right now whether it even happened. As you know, this all came about during the president's first cabinet meeting with his new chief of staff, John Kelly, on Monday here at the White House. The president was lavishing praise on Kelly, and he was talking about the things he had achieved as DHS secretary when he made this comment about Mexico. Let's look at this.
As you know, the border was a tremendous problem, and now close to 80% stoppage. And even the president of Mexico called me. They said their southern border, very few people are coming because they know they're not going to get through our border, which is the ultimate compliment.
So that might have been the ultimate compliment for Donald Trump, but it also might not have even happened. The president of Mexico is disputing this and saying that he hasn't had a call with President Trump, putting out a statement today saying they have not talked on the phone. Now, we know that the last time they met was July 7th at the G20 summit in Germany, and the president may be referring to that, but the White House has not returned requests for comment on this or some clarity about when this alleged call happened. So if this call didn't happen, as Mexico says, it really ties into this broader credibility problem that we're seeing with the White House. As you know, with that call that Trump says he had with the head of the Boy Scouts, that the Boy Scouts says didn't happen, and with what we learned yesterday about Donald Trump Jr.'s changing statement about his meeting with the Russian lawyer at Trump Tower last summer.
Caitlin, thank you. Let me broaden this out. Would bring in radio host Bill Press. Democrats supported both Sanders and Clinton, and Mary Catherine Ham, conservative blogger and senior writer for The Federalist. Here's the thing, Mary Catherine, let me just start with you. You know, when you hear about these stories, and I realize part of this is a bigger pattern, it's like somebody's nose is out to here now. Yeah. And does that somebody not realize that when you're president, that you know, your everything you say gets scrutinized and fact-checked, and you get caught?
I mean, he should realize that by now, but I'm not sure he does. Look, I think he's naturally sloppy, if not lying about this, right? Someone could have passed a message along that someone at the Boy Scouts said this, and it gets transcribed into this. But look, do you think you're going to tell this about the Boy Scouts, and the Boy Scouts aren't going to pipe up? This is easily verifiable, and I think the issue is, look, a lot of people voted for Trump because he was something drastically different, and they wanted unpredictable, and they wanted different. But you get to a point where, like, unreliable and making voters uncertain can turn even those who voted for him for those reasons off. And I think when it comes to meetings with world leaders or meetings with Senate Republicans who don't know if he's going to turn on them as soon as they're out of the room, that does become a problem just in daily workings in policy.
We were talking as we were doing this segment, Bill, about, you remember, of course, we love all things Stephen Colbert, and back during the Colbert Report days, you remember, you know where I'm going, the whole word he coined, which is truthiness. Does that not fit here, and isn't that an issue for the American people?
Well, it is. I was thinking of the Boy Scouts, actually. I'm a former Boy Scout, and the first word of the Boy Scout oath is a Boy Scout is trustworthy. Boy Scouts are. I don't think this president is. Echoing what Mary Catherine has said, look, you know, in a sense, it's not a big thing. It's a phone call. No big deal, but it is a big deal because it does speak to the issue of credibility. And this is a president who's got a problem with credibility to begin with, starting with the size of the crowd at the inaugural, and then the fact that there were never any meetings with anybody around him and anybody having anything to do with Russia. And so with that credibility problem, this makes it worse. And, you know,
but
for
Bill,
better or
this
for
isn't
worse,
just a small thing. I mean, I have all the respect for the Boy Scouts, but we're also talking about a world leader. This is the president of Mexico.
Right, no, the world and the president of the United States. So the point I was going to make is, I think, as Mary Catherine, I think you said too, I'm not sure that Donald Trump has ever woken up and said, I'm the president of the United States. Look, Brooke, you and I could go out and have a beer, and I could say, you know, I got a call the other day from some big top Republican. I may or may not have, right? That doesn't matter. But the president of the United States, every word he says matters. And so at worst, at best, it's an exaggeration. At worst, it's just a lie.
A lie. How does Sarah Huckabee Sanders spin this? or defend it or choose the word.
Look, I think she's proven pretty decent at
verbal
this
gymnastics.
job, and she, my approach would be, if I were in her shoes, the president heard what he heard, and the president's hearing, as you know, is terrific. It's the best hearing. And I'm going to take my next question. I don't know. Perhaps she will say that a message came from somebody and it wasn't this particular call. I think that's possible. I wish that the president would be precise about what he's saying. That is not his style. That's not what people voted for. But even when you're not lying, being precise is a virtue, and especially when you're president of the United States.
Can we talk about? Can we talk? I just wanted to move on before I run out of time. We're up against this briefing about the mooch. I know the mooch is gone, but he actually did talk to the Huffington Post, and he's dropping hints about his next move. So let me just read for all of us this part of his interview he did with the Huffington Post's Vicky Ward. This is quoting: "The president told me he knows I have his back, but he has to try to tighten the ship." She says, "So what are you going to do next?" He says, "I'm now going to go dark," he said. "And then," he says, "then I will reemerge as me." What, Bill Press, do you speak mooch? Do you know what that means? Might he have political ambitions? Will he go back to business? Do we have any idea?
Well, I'd have to say first that that string of expletives and vulgarity that we heard from him last Friday, if that wasn't going dark, I don't know what is, right? I have no idea. Look, this is a total loser. He sold his business, his wife dumped him, he lost his job in the White House, and now the Harvard Review says he's dead. I don't know where he goes from here.
Right, that was an accident, obviously. Right.
Yeah, I think the less we hear from the mooch or about the mooch, would all be better off.
I hate to call him a total, listen, I don't know the man, I hate to call him a total loser.
It was a very bad week,
It was a bad week. He never should have spoken so freely to Ryan Lizza. Great for Ryan Lizza, bad for the mooch. Where do you think he lands?
I don't know. This sounds like a superhero sort of announcement. I don't mind looking forward to the rise of the mooch phoenix at some point in whatever style he wants to come back. Perhaps outside of the policy world, but it will be entertaining.
Yeah. Mary Catherine.
I hope it's not in the White House. I just want to say that. I hope it's not in the White House.
MK and Bill, thank you so much. Again, we're watching and waiting for this press briefing. Sarah Huckabee Sanders has lots to talk about today. Also ahead are members of the Republican Party trying to work around President Trump to find a bipartisan way to repair health care. This as more and more Republicans are speaking out and standing up against the president. Also, at White House briefing ahead live as President Trump today signed. Hi there, I'm Brooke Baldwin. Thank you so much for being with me. You're watching CNN. Shortly, we are on Briefing Watch again today, the White House press briefing to begin in just the next little bit as President Trump makes several major moves on multiple critical issues, health care, sanctions, and immigration. Right now, I can tell you that he's meeting privately with Ohio Senator Rob Portman as this new bipartisan effort. You heard me right. Bipartisan effort kicks off to reform the nation's health care insurance system. Well, we'll talk about that in a second. Also, just a few hours ago, President Trump signed the sanctions bill against Russia, North Korea, and Iran. But while Congress overwhelmingly approved it, the president calls it flawed. And minutes ago, the president debuted the RAISE Act. This is a proposal to revamp how green cards are given out. RAISE is an acronym, stands for Reforming American Immigration for a Strong Economy. The president says it is time for an immigration system that is based on merit.
The RAISE Act ends chain migration and replaces our low-skilled system with a new points-based system for receiving a green card. This competitive application process will favor applicants who can speak English, financially support themselves and their families, and demonstrate skills that will contribute to our economy. The RAISE Act prevents new migrants and new immigrants from collecting welfare and protects U.S. workers from being displaced.
So let's go to the White House, to our senior White House correspondent there, Jim Acosta, ahead of the briefing. Let's go back, though, to this Russian sanctions bill that the president signed this morning, this veto-proof bill. People were kind of like, well, what took him so long? Well, what is it in it that he says he doesn't like?
Well, and this is something the White House, Brooke, has been saying for weeks now, that they do not want, or they did not want, a bill. This was really forced down their throats. They did not want a bill that limited the president's ability when it comes to lifting sanctions on Russia, or really having the ability to do what he wants with sanctions. They see that, and really, this is not to be unfair to the president. Other administrations have felt that that is the purview of the executive branch, and so they were trying to flex those muscles heading into all of this. But obviously, with the Russia investigation going on, and both parties in Congress essentially saying, no, we're not going to leave this matter of what to do about Russia to the president, given everything we've been talking about over the last 6 months, they brought a bill to the president that essentially had veto-proof majorities. And so even if he had vetoed this today, the Congress would have overridden those vetoes. And so what the president did instead was essentially all he could do. We should mention he did not sign this in front of the cameras. He's done other things like this in front of the cameras, did not do this in front of the cameras. He did this behind closed doors and attached a signing statement to it, essentially saying that this was unconstitutional, and added an additional statement on top of that, Brooke. And we can put a clip of that up on screen if we want to show that to our viewers. The president at one point saying that he was doing this all for national unity, but here's what the president says. Still, the bill remains seriously flawed, particularly because it encroaches on the executive branch's authority to negotiate. Congress could not even, going on here, negotiate a health care bill after 7 years of talking. So taking a swipe at Congress there, and really his own party for not getting a health care bill out of the Congress and to him, and saying, okay, well, you can't do health care, but you can get a sanctions bill to me. He's clearly not feeling good about all of this, and we'll have to take the temperature of Sarah Huckabee Sanders in the briefing room and see how they're spinning this, because obviously, you know, this is a humbling moment for the president. He was forced to do this. He did not want to sign this bill, Brooke.
To begin with your point there on how it was a humbling moment for him. Jim Acosta, we'll see you in the briefing room momentarily. Thank you. As we're waiting for Sarah Huckabee Sanders to take to that podium, let me just bring in CNN chief political analyst Gloria Borger and CNN political analyst Abby Phillip, who is also a White House reporter for the Washington Post. Ladies, welcome. And Gloria, a couple of points that Jim made I thought were great. The fact that there were no cameras. You know, this is a pretty significant signing, and there were no cameras, so nothing visual there for us to see. And also how he is calling this flawed. And perhaps to Jim's point, this is about, you know, the president's powers being held back.
Well, that's what he says.
What do you think?
The president believes he should have ultimate authority, except that there are co-equal branches of government in this country. One of them happens to be the Congress. John McCain just released a statement saying the framers of our Constitution made the Congress and the president co-equal branches. This bill has already proven the wisdom of that choice. And what the bill says is that Congress gets the final say here, period. Now, there was a veto-proof margin here, so he was backed up against the wall. He had to do it. He didn't like it. He doesn't like it when Congress gets the final say. But sorry, that's the way the Constitution was written. And Congress flexed its muscle here and said, sorry, we're not going to give you the final say on Russia sanctions. And I believe you can't separate that from the fact that the president hasn't come out and said that Russia hacked the election. I mean, these things are joined, and I don't think the Congress trusts him on Russia, period, end of sentence.
There had been questions about whether he understood the boundaries of the justice branch and now legislative. Good point on that. I'm coming back to you. Abby, let me just bring you in here, because also today we're learning the administration is taking on two big issues today. One on this immigration event we mentioned a second ago, where the White House is arguing they want to switch to this skill-based immigration system with the goal of reducing legal immigration by 50%. There is also reporting out of the New York Times today that the Department of Justice, speaking of that branch, looking to challenge race-based admission programs at colleges and universities, meaning with the potential aim of protecting white applicants from discrimination. My question to you is, why is he so blatantly playing to his base? And might part of this be, does he sense trouble looming in this healthcare loss?
Well, trouble is basically already here for him. I mean, you cannot separate the timing of these announcements from the fact that there are, to date, no major legislative accomplishments for this administration. And we're getting to the point in the summer here where it's do or die. They have to decide, are they going to restart the healthcare debate, which it seems like virtually no one on the Hill thinks is doable or wants to do at this point in time? Or do they just cut their losses and move on to taxes? And even the tax proposition seems to be facing a fairly uphill battle. So this administration is dealing with the reality that getting stuff through Congress is really going to be quite difficult for them between now and the end of the year. And what these moves are all about is signaling to the base that, yeah, we're still interested in the things that you guys voted for that put Donald Trump into office, and it's no surprise that they are targeting two kind of absolute pillars of his campaign, one of them being restricting immigration and this idea of benefiting U.S. workers, and the other being the kind of forgotten American, which many people believed was code for the predominantly white middle America, Rust Belt part of the country, and the concerns that they have around those issues.
On the first piece on immigration, and shout out to my writer Tina for thinking of the Statue of Liberty, because there is this poem that's forever linked to the Statue of Liberty. It was once part of the pedestal, it's now part of this display, and it reads, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." I mean, people have pointed to this message. Critics are calling this immigration move today un-American. I mean, how much, Gloria, how much support does this have, not just among his base, but among Republicans?
Well, it may have some support among Republicans. I mean, it remains to be seen. Merit-based immigration is not what this country was founded on. I mean, obviously, you don't want to bring criminals into the country, et cetera, but you don't ask people for their college degrees or their income or anything else when they come into this country. Very often they come here because they're looking for something better than what they have. And so the question is whether, in fact, the president will have those moderate Republicans behind him who didn't want to build the wall, who don't believe in the wall. Will this be any more palatable to them? I don't really think so.
Okay. Abby, over to you. For despite the president's push for Republican lawmakers to not give up on the repeal and replace of Obamacare, there are now these indications that folks on the Hill, the Republicans, actually want to work with Democrats to figure out fixes. We've been talking today about Republican Senator Lamar Alexander. He's talking about holding bipartisan hearings on actions where Congress can take to stabilize healthcare markets. Do you think that this is a trend of what's to come, of more and more Republicans standing up against the president? And what's the net effect of that when it comes to policy?
Yeah, I mean, particularly on healthcare, this could be a moment where the Republicans and Democrats do exactly the opposite of what Trump wants them to do, which is hold hands with Democrats and fix Obamacare. They are facing the reality that the marketplace next year could be absolutely disastrous for their constituents, and the only way to prevent that from happening is, short of passing some kind of repeal and replace that is perhaps better than what they were contemplating before, fixing the marketplace, funding those cost-sharing subsidies to insurance companies. That's something the president and this administration has not wanted to do, and if Congress chooses to do that, which they very well might, it would be in defiance of the administration. But really, Brooke, at this point, it seems like that is really the only option on the table. Leadership has said they do not have the votes to go back to the table on repeal and replace, and it's going to be politically unpalatable to go into 2018 without having fixed some of these problems with the marketplace. People would be in very dire straits, and the Republican Party, because they are running all branches of government right now, is going to be blamed for that.
But it's not even just on health care. I mean, you could add other Republican senators to the list who are standing up against him. Lisa Murkowski, for one. You can also think of Senator McCain and that, powerful speech he gave on the Senate floor, but also what he's saying now in Afghanistan policy. We know all about the book and the quotes from Senator Jeff Flake. I mean, Gloria, what are we, like 6 months and some change into this whole thing?
We are.
The honeymoon is long over. Is this just the beginning of what's to come?
Well, I think it is. First of all, these senators don't want the president, who has threatened to break Obamacare, who has threatened to end these subsidies, because he knows that it would break Obamacare, but that would also hurt millions of people. And that's what the senators don't want to do. I mean, there's another thing on that list. Senator Mitch McConnell has said he doesn't want to end the filibuster in the Senate.
There you go.
And the president has said he would do that. He has a 36% approval rating, a 60% disapproval rating. So it's not like these are all courageous people. They are just looking at the polling right now, and they're saying, you know what, it's okay. And what Jeff Flake has said is, look, we Republicans need to speak out because a lot of this stuff is not anything we agree with, actually. This is not what our party is about. And so you see more Republicans coalescing on issues and saying, you know what, we're going to have to try and do things on our own without this White House. Now, that may change with General Kelly. I saw that Rob Portman is at the White House today, as you were talking about earlier, talking about the opioid crisis. There may be more conversation rather than threats coming out of this White House. We're just going to have to see. But I think we're at a tipping point right now with Republicans in the Senate who are saying, you know what, we may need to go our own way.
Live pictures inside the briefing room. All of the themes we discussed will certainly be thrown at Sarah Huckabee Sanders momentarily. Ladies, thank you so much. Coming up, we'll take that White House briefing live. Also ahead, too close for
a whopping $80 million currently sitting around unused by the U.S. State Department. This, according to a new report in Politico. Congress allocated the money to go towards fighting ISIS propaganda and Russian disinformation. But Secretary of State Rex Tillerson refuses to touch it. The reason? He reportedly doesn't want to upset Moscow. Let's bring in our global affairs correspondent, Elise Labott, who's joining us. Elise, you've been reporting on this. What are you hearing?
Well, Wolf, what I'm hearing is that, State Department officials telling me that this was slightly mischaracterized. Now, it's true that this sum $80 million is sitting both in the Pentagon, $60 million in the Pentagon, $20 million at the State Department for use to counter Russian and anti-ISIS propaganda. What State Department officials are telling me is that they're not happy with the proposals that have been sent to them from this office, the Global Engagement Center, which is, has been created to combat some of these propaganda efforts by Russia and ISIS and other groups around the world. And so they are trying to work through proposals. And what they say is one of Secretary Tillerson's aides told me that they don't want to throw good money after bad. And when I spoke to Congress staffers on the Hill, they say, look, we don't want to throw good money after bad, but Congress appropriated this money. We want to see that it's spent.
We'll see if it is spent. All right, thanks very much, Elise, for that update. Up next, an explosive new lawsuit that accuses Fox News, a Republican donor, and the White House of working together to push a false story to the masses. We're going to speak with one of the lawyers at the center of the case. That's next.
Welcome back. Set aside for a moment the giant disagreements between Republicans and Democrats on the future of Obamacare. The most important gap at the moment is an internal Republican affair, a stare down between Senate GOP leaders and the Trump White House.
Let's not move on from health care just because you failed by one vote. The president isn't giving up on health care, neither should the Senate.
But the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says, sorry, Mr. President, the Senate won't immediately try again. And as he made that crystal clear, he also fired back at the president's weekend tweet storm, suggesting that somehow a change in Senate rules might help.
It's pretty obvious that our problem with health care was not the Democrats. We didn't have 50 Republicans. There are not the votes in the Senate, as I've said repeatedly to the president and to all of you, to change the rules of the Senate.
No, sir. That was a long way of saying no, sir, Mr. President. So what next? If you can believe it in today's politics, maybe a try at bipartisanship. Senate Health Committee Chairman Lamar Alexander says he's working with Democrats to hold hearings on the biggest immediate health care challenges. Quote, if your house is on fire, you want to put out the fire. And the fire in this case is the individual health insurance market. Both Republicans and Democrats agree on this. So two questions for the table. Number one, pretty remarkable, the Senate Majority Leader saying go away to the White House.
Not for the first time.
Not for the first time, but it seems to be getting a little bit more pointed there.
For the most public time.
Yeah, and then we were joking during the break about a Ouija board. What would the Ouija board tell us on this question of can Washington actually do something bipartisan, a temporary, small, modest fixes to Obamacare?
I do think there is a bipartisan desire to get this done. On the part of Republicans, it's more like panic. They are very concerned about the political fallout of the president's suggested strategy of sabotaging Obamacare, making it fail, undermining it so that people's health care gets worse, and then the Democrats all run ads say, see, Republicans want to just make your health care worse. That you know, what Trump does is not necessarily the biggest political problem for Republicans in 2018 when they're on the ballot and he isn't, because a lot of voters really do see them as separate entities. A lot of voters really don't blame Republicans in Congress when they get mad at Trump. But what they will, I think, hold Republicans in Congress accountable for is whatever does or doesn't get done on health care.
I think the big issue here is whether they can keep it to contained to just what comes up in those bipartisan discussions, right? I think there is some
feeling climate change's impact in